Barack Obama had always been known for his deliberate way of speaking, his ability to weave words into ideas that stayed long after the applause ended. That night on live television, his tone was no different, but his choice of words carried a sharper edge. He stood on the stage, not as a former president competing for relevance, but as a leader dissecting the very nature of power and responsibility. The crowd listened, waiting for what he would say next. And he began by describing leadership in its most stripped-down form: service to the people, not service to one's own ego. It sounded simple, but everyone could hear the undercurrent. He wasn't speaking about leadership in general. He was speaking about Donald Trump without ever needing to say his name. Obama painted the picture with surgical precision. He talked about leaders who chased headlines instead of results. Leaders who thrived on stirring division because chaos brought them attention. He spoke about how some saw public office as a stage rather than a duty, where performance mattered more than substance. Each line landed carefully, almost gently, but the weight behind them was undeniable. Viewers across the country felt the same realization settle in: it was about Trump. Every example pointed at him, from the obsession with ratings to the fixation on image and the constant need for applause. Obama was exposing him in a way no insult could. This was truth laid bare in front of millions. The brilliance of Obama's approach lay in its restraint. He never raised his voice, never looked angry. He didn't wave his hands or break into the kind of showmanship his opponent was famous for. Instead, he let silence do the heavy lifting between sentences. He would pause, look at the audience, and allow them to connect the dots themselves. That's what made it sting more. There was no need for exaggeration or drama. The facts alone, when placed in contrast with what people had seen from Trump over the years, were more powerful than any attack line. It was a dismantling built on calm, undeniable truths. In living rooms across America, people leaned forward. Some were stunned that he was going there so directly, even without names. Others grinned knowingly, realizing they were witnessing one of those rare political moments that would be replayed again and again. Social media lit up instantly. Clips were being cut and shared before Obama had even finished speaking. Words like precision, surgical, and calm destruction filled timelines. It wasn't just a critique, it was a mass in exposure, the kind where the target's reputation gets punctured not by shouting but by carefully placed pins. What made it even more powerful was how obvious it became that Trump would hear this. For years he had cast himself as Obama's opposite, using insults, conspiracies, and rallies to carve out his identity in contrast to him. Now, live on television, Obama was returning fire in the most devastating way possible without even acknowledging him directly. It was the kind of exposure Trump hated most. Not a flashy headline or a messy brawl, but a calm figure of authority showing the public that the emperor's clothes weren't quite what they seemed. Obama's precision left no escape route. Had it been a dramatic rant, Trump could have brushed it off as bitterness or partisanship. But here was a man admired globally, speaking in measured tones, laying out the facts of what leadership should be, and letting the comparison do the rest. No matter how Trump chose to react, the damage was already done. Millions had seen the contrast live. Millions had already drawn their conclusions. Those who supported Obama felt vindicated, as though the words gave voice to what they had long believed. Those who supported Trump braced for the eruption they knew was coming, because if there was one thing certain about him, it was that he couldn't ignore being exposed, especially not on such a massive stage. The tension in that moment was almost cinematic, but it wasn't drama for its own sake. It was real, raw politics unfolding with the precision of a scalpel. Obama stepped back from the podium with the same calm demeanor he had carried throughout. He smiled, greeted the audience, and walked off, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with reaction. He hadn't shouted, he hadn't thrown punches, yet his words had landed harder than any verbal brawl. Trump had just been exposed, not in a storm of insults, but in the quiet, precise delivery of truth. And for millions watching, it was shocking not because it was loud, but because it was undeniable. Trump had always thrived on energy, the roar of the crowd, the rush of instant feedback. Whether it was a rally or a press conference, he fed on reactions the way an actor feeds on applause. But when Barack Obama's words began echoing across the airwaves, something different happened. The usual confidence that shielded him seemed to crack. He was watching live, surrounded by aides and close allies, and every sentence that flowed from Obama's mouth felt like a dart aimed directly at him. His face tightened, his hand gestured wildly toward the television, and his voice rose in agitation. The eruption was brewing before the cameras even caught wind of it. Those near him described the scene as explosive. He paced back and forth, pointing at the screen, cutting off staff mid-sentence as they tried to calm him. He didn't just hear Obama's words, he felt them as a personal attack, a calculated humiliation broadcast to millions. And to Trump, who had always prided himself on controlling the narrative, losing control of the story was the ultimate insult. That's when his eruption spilled beyond the room. His voice cracked with anger as he demanded a response. The need to fight back, to reclaim the spotlight, overwhelmed everything else. Asterisk within minutes. The eruption went public. His social media feed lit up with a barrage of posts, all capital letters, accusations, and declarations that Obama was lying, jealous, and obsessed with him. It wasn't a measured statement, nor was it a careful rebuttal. It was raw fury spilling into the open for the entire world to see. He accused Obama of fabricating, of disrespecting the office, of failing the country. The stream of messages came so fast that reporters could barely keep up. Screenshots went viral almost instantly, each one adding fuel to a fire that was already raging across the internet. Asterisk the eruption didn't stop online. Soon, clips began circulating of Trump speaking to reporters, his voice raised, his words spilling out in sharp bursts. He said Obama had no right to lecture him, no credibility to speak about leadership, and that the entire performance was staged to embarrass him. But what stood out most wasn't the words themselves, it was the intensity behind them. His face flushed, his hands cutting through the air, his tone unrelenting. It was a performance of rage, the kind of eruption that revealed more than it concealed. Asterisk observers couldn't help but note the contrast. Obama's calm dismantling versus Trump's fiery eruption played like a split screen for the country to witness. On one side, a steady voice speaking in measured tones. On the other, a torrent of anger, raw and unfiltered. The very differences that had defined their years of rivalry were once again on full display, this time in the most public of settings. And whether people admired Trump's passion or recoiled from his fury, the image was unforgettable. Asterisk for his supporters. The eruption was proof that he was fighting back, unwilling to be humiliated by his old rival. They cheered his defiance, reposted his words, and claimed that he was the only one bold enough to confront Obama head-on. But for his critics, the meltdown confirmed what they had long believed, that he was thin-skinned, easily provoked, and incapable of handling critique with composure. Either way, the eruption became the story. News channels replayed it, commentators dissected it, and late-night shows used it as material to highlight the ever-growing gulf between the two men. Asterisk, the eruption also revealed something deeper about Trump himself. He wasn't just reacting to Obama's words, he was reacting to the power they carried. Obama had exposed him without ever using his name, and that subtlety was what cut the deepest. Trump couldn't ignore it because it wasn't a headline. He could dismiss as fake news. It was a former president, respected across the world, holding up a mirror in front of millions. That kind of exposure was unbearable to him, and the eruption was the only way he knew to push back. Asterisk in the hours that followed, the fury didn't subside. Advisors urged him to calm down, to issue a composed response, but he refused. Every attempt at softening his message only seemed to anger him more. He wanted the world to see his rage, to know that he wouldn't stay silent when attacked. To Trump, silence meant weakness, and weakness was never an option. The eruption, in his mind, was strength or refusal to be diminished. Asterisk yet to the public, the images told another story. Where Obama had seemed untouchable in his composure, Trump looked cornered, fighting desperately to claw back control. The contrast was jarring. It was the eruption, not Obama's words, that lingered in the nation's memory. The more he shouted, the more people remembered the calm precision that had triggered it in the first place. And while he may have convinced his base that he was standing tall, millions of others saw something different, a man unraveling under the weight of exposure he couldn't silence. The eruption had already made headlines, but what came next turned the clash into a national spectacle. When Barack Obama's carefully crafted words met Donald Trump's furious response, the public became the true arena where the battle played out. Millions of people across the country had tuned in to watch Obama's speech live, but it was the aftermath of shockwaves that spread online and across television screens that made the story impossible to escape. Asterisk on social media, the divide became immediately clear. Clips of Obama speaking with calm authority circulated widely, shared with captions praising his composure and intelligence. The contrast with Trump's eruption was impossible to ignore. Side-by-side comparisons began trending, Obama leaning into the microphone, measured and deliberate, next to Trump shouting at reporters, his face red and his gestures frantic. People didn't need commentators to explain the difference. The images themselves told the whole story. It was a split that went beyond politics, cutting straight into character and temperament. Asterisk television networks seized on the moment, replaying both clips back. Anchors leaned into the spectacle, pointing out how Obama never once mentioned Trump's name, yet managed to provoke such an intense and immediate reaction. Pundits debated whether Trump had fallen into a trap, allowing Obama to control the narrative simply by remaining calm. One commentator described it as a chess player baiting an opponent into flipping the board, and the metaphor stuck. By nightfall, it seemed like the entire country was dissecting not just what had been said, but how it had been said and how it had been received. Asterisk in households across America, the reaction was mixed but equally intense. Some viewers laughed at the eruption, shaking their heads at how easily Trump had been rattled. Others, especially his loyal supporters, felt the opposite. They saw his rage as authenticity, a refusal to let insults slide unanswered. For them, his eruption wasn't weakness. It was proof that he cared enough to fight back. The divide in perception turned the moment into more than just a clash of personalities. It became another front in the larger cultural war that had already been dividing the country for years. But beyond loyalty or opposition, there was one thing nearly everyone agreed on. The moment was unforgettable. It had all the elements of a television drama, yet it was real life playing out in front of the nation. Obama's precision and Trump's eruption became a looped highlight reel, endlessly repeated on news stations, late-night comedy shows, and viral memes. Even those who didn't follow politics closely found themselves caught up in the spectacle, talking about it at work, in schools, and around dinner tables. What made it so shocking wasn't just the contrast, it was the fact that it happened, live, with no script and no warning. People weren't used to seeing Trump caught off guard. For years he had built his image on being the one who controlled the room, the one who dictated the energy and the narrative. But here he was, reacting instead of leading, shouting instead of strategizing. That reversal fascinated the public. For some, it was the first time they had seen him look cornered, like the spotlight that once empowered him was suddenly too bright. The shockwaves didn't stop with ordinary viewers. Politicians, journalists, and even international figures weighed in. Foreign newspapers ran stories about the confrontation, some framing it as a symbolic moment between America's past and present leadership styles. Editorials dissected the psychology of Trump's reaction, suggesting that Obama had touched on a vulnerability that no one else had managed to expose so cleanly. For critics, it was confirmation of Trump's volatility. For supporters, it was evidence that he was still the fighter they admired. The public was split, but captivated all the same. And yet, beneath the surface of all the analysis and commentary, there was an undeniable sense that the moment had revealed something deeper about both men. Obama had shown that words, delivered calmly, could pierce through noise and chaos. Trump had shown that when pressed, his instinct was always to fight loudly, immediately, and with no filter. That contrast left people stunned because it went beyond politics. It was about personality, temperament, and the very idea of what leadership looked like in America. As the days passed, the public shock didn't fade, it grew. Every replay of Obama's speech seemed to make Trump's eruption feel bigger, louder, and harder to defend. The contrast became a kind of shorthand for their rivalry, a story that people told and retold as proof of the difference between them. Some saw it as the moment Trump lost control of his image. Others saw it as the moment he proved his loyalty to those who demanded he never back down. Either way, the impact was undeniable. The shock wasn't in the words themselves, but in how they exposed both men so clearly in front of a nation that couldn't look away. The clash between Barack Obama's calm precision and Donald Trump's fiery eruption did not disappear after the cameras stopped rolling. Instead, it settled into the national memory as one of those rare moments that revealed more than either man might have intended. What lingered wasn't just the sharp words or the heated responses, it was the lasting impact. The way the episode reshaped how people viewed them both. It wasn't a headline that faded after 24 hours. It was a story that kept resurfacing. A reference point for how two presidents embodied such opposite approaches to leadership. For Obama. The moment reinforced his image as a figure of composure, someone who didn't need volume or aggression to command attention. He had exposed Trump not with insults but with carefully chosen truths, and in doing so, he reminded people why his words carried weight. Commentators praised the way he managed to dismantle Trump's persona without ever once saying his name. That restraint became the highlight of his performance. It showed that power didn't always come from shouting louder, but from speaking with clarity and letting the truth do the work. Even those who didn't agree with his politics admitted that he had delivered his message in a way that few others could. For Trump, the impact was different. His eruption became a defining moment that people replayed whenever his temperament was questioned. The image of him red-faced, lashing out, while Obama remained calm, was etched into the public imagination. For critics, it became proof that he was easily rattled, that beneath the bravado was a man vulnerable to exposure. They used the moment as a weapon, pointing back to it in debates and articles whenever his leadership style came under scrutiny. It became shorthand for the contrast between impulse and patience, fury and composure. Yet for his supporters, the eruption carried its own kind of power. They argued that his anger showed authenticity, that he was not a polished politician hiding behind rehearsed lines but someone willing to fight, unfiltered and unapologetic. To them, Obama's calm was calculated and cold, while Trump's eruption was fiery and human. That interpretation kept the rivalry alive, feeding into the deep divide that had already split the nation. The impact of that night wasn't just political, it was cultural, shaping conversations about what people wanted from a leader and how they defined strength. The lasting impact could also be seen in how the media continued to frame the story. Months later, when discussing Trump's reactions to criticism, reporters and analysts often circled back to the night of Obama's speech. They recalled how quickly he had lost control of the narrative, how his eruption overshadowed everything else. The moment became a benchmark for understanding his behavior. A reminder that exposure and critique could push him into the spotlight in ways he didn't always intend. Every future outburst was measured against that one, amplifying its importance over time. Asterisk internationally, the moment didn't go unnoticed either. News outlets around the world covered it as a symbolic clash between two visions of American leadership. In Europe, commentators described it as a study in contrasts, with Obama representing diplomacy and poise, and Trump embodying raw emotion and defiance. In Asia and Africa, headlines pointed out the irony that a leader who thrived on commanding attention had been undone by someone who barely acknowledged him. The exposure, and the eruption that followed, rippled far beyond U.S. borders, adding to the global conversation about America's political identity. Asterisk, but perhaps the deepest impact was felt within the American public itself. For many, the night crystallized what they already felt about both men. Obama was the careful strategist, delivering his words like a scalpel. Trump was the brawler, swinging hard the moment he felt attacked. The event didn't change minds as much as it confirmed beliefs, hardening divisions and intensifying loyalties. Those who admired Obama saw the exposure as a masterstroke. Those who admired Trump saw the eruption as a badge of honor. It wasn't just a clash on television, it became part of the story people told themselves about the kind of leader they valued. Asterisk, even years later, when people recalled the rivalry between the two, that live television moment remained near the top of the list. It symbolized everything about their dynamic, the quiet dismantling on one side, the furious eruption on the other. It was more than a soundbite, more than a viral clip, it was a lasting imprint on the political landscape. The exposure and the eruption became inseparable, a pair of moments locked together in memory, shaping how the public saw not just Obama and Trump, but the very idea of leadership in America. When the dust settled and the cameras moved on, what remained was not just a single night of confrontation but a defining snapshot of America's political divide. Barack Obama and Donald Trump had clashed many times in words and in spirit, but the live television moment carried a weight unlike any other. It was simple, almost understated in its setup. One man speaking calmly about leadership, another erupting in rage at being exposed. Yet the echoes of that moment stretched far beyond the broadcast, carving themselves into the way people understood both men. Asterisk for Obama. The evening reaffirmed what had always set him apart, his ability to wield words like tools rather than weapons. He didn't need volume to make his point, nor did he need to utter Trump's name to make the connection clear. His composure became the message itself. By refusing to descend into insult or dramatics, he demonstrated that the most effective way to expose someone was often to let them expose themselves. His calmness became a mirror that magnified the other man's volatility, and that contrast left a lasting impression on millions watching. Asterisk for Trump. The night became both a curse and a crown. His eruption, replayed endlessly, was used by critics as evidence that he was unfit, unable to take critique without unraveling. It painted him as a man consumed by image and incapable of letting even subtle jabs go unanswered. Yet to his base, the eruption was proof of his authenticity. They admired that he never let slights pass, that he wore his anger openly instead of concealing it behind carefully measured lines. What some saw as weakness, others saw as strength, and that paradox became the reason the moment never truly faded. Asterisk, the public reaction revealed something larger than either man. It revealed the country itself. The split-screen image of Obama's .com against Trump's fury became a metaphor for America's divide. One half of the nation applauded composure and subtlety, while the other half cheered defiance and raw emotion. Neither side was willing to concede the other's point. That stubbornness, amplified by media replaying the clash again and again, turned the event into a cultural touchstone. It wasn't just about two men anymore, it was about two visions of what leadership should look like. Asterisk, even outside America, the moment resonated. To the world it symbolized the nation's conflicting identities, the steady diplomat and the fiery disruptor, battling not with fists, but with words and reactions. Allies and rivals alike studied the exchange, some shaking their heads at the chaos, others marveling at the spectacle. In that sense, the night became more than a political episode. It became a global reference point for the clash of styles that defined an era. Asterisk in the end, the live television confrontation wasn't just a battle of words. It was a revelation of character. Obama exposed through restraint. Trump erupted through instinct. Both were true to themselves, and both left the public with an unforgettable contrast. The lasting impact wasn't in who won the moment, but in how clearly it revealed what each man represented. And for a nation caught between calm and chaos, truth and fury, that revelation was as shocking